Good morning and welcome to News Conference Extra, a special segment of Today in LA Weekend. With us, the Honorable Adam Schiff, member of the U.S. House of Representatives, representing Glendale, Burbank, and Pasadena, the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman, thanks for taking the time.
It's a pleasure.
On Friday, we heard word that Saleh Abdeslam, who is apparently the mastermind of the Paris attacks, was taken into custody along with two other individuals. How important is that?
It's huge, and you can imagine for the people of Paris that went through that terrible nightmare, capturing the 10th participant in those awful attacks is incredibly meaningful. They can bring him to justice now. But more than that, we can gain a lot of intelligence about how this plan was hatched, how much Syria leadership was involved in it, what role he played in terms of logistics. He's believed to have rented some of the vehicles, arranged some of the logistics, transported some of the bombers and the shooters. He is also believed to have had a suicide belt himself, which obviously he didn't use. So there are a lot of unanswered questions about why he survived and why he didn't take his own life along with others. So it will help the investigation considerably.
There's no indication at all that this individual had any contact with the two individuals that carried out the shooting attack in San Bernardino.
No, there's no indication of that.
Let's talk about that case, though, because it's opened up a whole can of worms with the federal government, Congress now getting involved. What is your position when it comes to the Apple versus the FBI standoff over the privacy rights of iPhone owners and whether or not the government has a compelling interest in trying to get a backdoor into the information from one of the shooter's iPhones?
Well, I think the government certainly has a compelling interest in wanting to solve crimes like this terrorism case. And it's not just this terrorism case, because there are already hundreds of other cases around the country, some involving murder, some involving drug crimes, where the critical piece of evidence is on the particular phone that they can't get into. So yes, it's a critical need for law enforcement. At the same time, Apple is right. This isn't just about that one phone in San Bernardino. It's about a much broader policy question, and that is how much risk is involved with creating a door. Can people hack through that door? Does that mean that other people's, innocent people's iPhones are exposed? These are really tough issues of great consequence. And frankly, I think what's going to be necessary to solve it is not litigation, although that litigation will go forward, but rather getting the parties together outside of the courtroom context to figure out, is there a third way here? Is there a middle way? Is there a way to satisfy the public safety interests? At the same time, we can assure people's privacy.
At the moment, it doesn't appear there's a third way.
Well, you're absolutely right. The positions the parties have taken seem very polemic. They don't seem to admit much compromise. But I think there probably are opportunities to reach some kind of an agreement here. I don't know yet what that would look like. I've asked that the National Academy of Sciences do a report for Congress. We asked that for that in the fall on the technological issues. And that is, the technology industry is making the point that if they introduce any door, there's a vulnerability. And there's truth to that. At the same time, there is already a door. It's the door that they need to go through when they update everybody's phone. So the reality is there are already risks with everyone's phone. And the question is, how much added risk do you have if you allow law enforcement access when they have a court order to someone's phone?
After San Bernardino, Senator Dianne Feinstein went public and said she hasn't gotten much help from Silicon Valley or the tech industry. She's introduced legislation, and that legislation sides with the Department of Justice and the FBI. What is your take on that?
I think we're very far from the kind of consensus you need in Congress to move a bill like that. So I think that's
and the bill essentially answers the dilemma on the side of the government.
Yes, the bill, as I understand it, the text hasn't been released yet, would require that when a tech company gets a warrant from the government, gets a court order, that they make sure that they've designed their products in a way where they can respond to lawful process. But I think that would have a very hard time getting through Congress right now. There's simply no consensus on where we ought to go, whether we ought to allow that kind of access, whether we ought to prohibit it in all cases, as Apple would argue. So I think probably the only legislation at the moment that's likely to move is a bill that would establish a commission to try to answer the scientific and technical questions. But again, that kicks the can somewhat down the road. This is going to be an enormous challenge to solve, but I think the best way to solve it is, frankly, not trying to litigate it, not trying to force something through Congress that there isn't yet a consensus on, but rather trying to get the parties together and seeing if we can hammer out some agreement.
Let's move on. The President has nominated a candidate for the Supreme Court opening. The House Republican or the Senate Republican leadership says we're going to wait to the end of the election or the next president. Have you seen any indication of that position softening on the Republican side in the Senate?
Only a little bit. You are seeing some Republican senators say that they will talk with him. They're saying that they may even vote for him in a lame duck session, presumably if Hillary Clinton were to win. I have to say, though, I find this appalling. This is a co-equal branch of government. There's no excuse for not taking up and voting on a nominee. No one has questioned the superb qualifications of this judge. No one has suggested he wouldn't be a good member of the court.
Yes, but Vice President Joe Biden didn't do you any favors when, as a senator, he essentially made the same point when it came to George Bush nominating.
You know, there is plenty of history, I think, to point to on both sides of the aisle when it comes to delaying not just Supreme Court judges, but district court and court of appeals judges. I've argued for a long time. In fact, I led a bipartisan effort in the House urging the Senate to pick a date certain. Maybe it's 90 days with a district court judge and longer for court of appeals or Supreme Court judge. And then whoever the majority is, whoever the president is, you vote. You take a vote. You do the time to vet that you need, but each party agree to have a vote. And the problem is that if we were going to make these rules not knowing who was in the majority and who the president was, we could agree on them.
Right,
but
exactly.
Since we do, it always means that we have this kind of impasse. But I have to say, I just find this appalling. We're going to have a vacancy. We have a 4-4 court for a year, completely unnecessary.
Some would argue, though, that the GOP thinks that they're going to lose in the fall. If they nominate somebody who they don't think is going to carry, then maybe all of a sudden they might think twice about not working on it.
Well, and that's probably the best chance for this particular judge, and that is if Hillary Clinton is the nominee or is the president-elect in the lame duck session, they may decide they're better off with this moderate judge than buying something they don't know what they're getting.
Final question. You were a big proponent of SeaWorld getting rid of their orca shows. And so SeaWorld announced recently that now it's going to be in the business, when it comes to killer whales, of education solamente. No longer are they going to be doing tricks. Why is that important, and why was that a personal goal of yours?
You know, it was a personal goal of mine because I really felt that these magnificent animals that travel up to 100 miles a day, they can go to depths of 300 feet, don't belong in a small tank swimming around in circles. And you can see the damage it does to the animals. It's quite palpable physically, mentally, and otherwise. I think that evidence was very well documented in films like Blackfish. So I think that we ought to do away with orcas in captivity by ending breeding of new orcas in captivity, by ending wild capture. I introduced a bill to accomplish that a few months ago. And the decision by SeaWorld, I think, is an enormous sea change for the organization because it basically does both of those things. It says we're not going to breed them anymore, we're not going to capture them anymore, and this generation is going to be the last generation in captivity. I think it's smart business for SeaWorld because essentially what they're responding to is people were voting with their feet. They just weren't going to the park in the kind of numbers that they used to.
Congressman Adam Schiff, Democrat from Glendale, Burbank, Pasadena, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.